They needed you to stay small, not because there was something wrong with you, not because you weren't capable, not because you weren't intelligent, not because you weren't valuable. They needed you to stay small because the version of you that didn't know your worth was easier to manage. Think about that. Because if you ever look back on a relationship, a friendship, a family dynamic, a workplace, a church, or any environment and wondered, why did they become so uncomfortable when I started changing? Why did they suddenly call me selfish? Why did they suddenly call me difficult? Why did they suddenly act like I was the problem? Then you know exactly what I'm talking about, because a lot of people are perfectly comfortable with you as long as you're the version of yourself that benefits them, as long as you're the version that overgives, as long as you're the version that over-explains, the version that overthinks, the version that doubts yourself, the version that apologizes for existing, the version that asks for permission, the version that stays, the version that keeps trying, the version that keeps giving chances, the version that keeps choosing everybody over yourself. That version, people love that version because that version doesn't disrupt anything. That version doesn't rock the boat. That version doesn't challenge anything. That version doesn't require anybody else to change, because the moment you started changing, everything changed. You see, the moment you started asking questions, everything changed. The moment you started setting boundaries, everything changed. The moment you started saying, wait a minute, maybe I deserve more than this. Maybe I deserve better than this. Maybe I'm not the problem. Everything changed. That's when you started seeing people differently. Because isn't it interesting how some people support your growth until your growth affects them? They'll support your healing until your healing creates boundaries. They'll support your confidence until your confidence means you no longer need their approval. They'll support your independence until your independence means they lose control. And if you've ever experienced that, then you know how painful that realization can be. Because you start looking back and asking yourself, did they ever really want what was best for me? Did they ever really want me to grow? Did they ever really want me to succeed? Or did they just want me to stay the version of myself that made them comfortable? And that's a difficult question, because nobody wants to believe that the people they loved, trusted, respected, or depended on benefited from them staying small. But if we're being honest, some people did. Some people benefited from your lack of confidence. Some people benefited from your lack of boundaries. Some people benefited from your fear. Some people benefited from your self-doubt. Some people benefited from your willingness to tolerate things you never should have tolerated. And here's the part that hurts. A lot of times they didn't even realize they were doing it, because people become attached to versions of us. They become attached to roles: the caretaker, the fixer, the peacemaker, the giver, the loyal one, the understanding one, the strong one, the one who always comes back, the one who never leaves, the one who never chooses themselves. And when you stop playing that role, people get confused. Not because you become worse, not because you become selfish, not because you become difficult, but because you become different. You've become unavailable to the version of yourself that they understood, you see. And that's what creates the conflict, because growth changes relationships, growth changes families, growth changes friendships, growth changes everything. Think about who you were before you started waking up. Think about how much of your life revolved around keeping other people comfortable. Think about how many decisions you made because you were afraid of disappointing somebody. Think about how many times you betrayed yourself so somebody else wouldn't feel uncomfortable. And then think about who you became afterward. More honest, more aware, more discerning, more willing to walk away, more self-loving, more willing to disappoint people if that meant not disappointing yourself. And no, that didn't happen overnight. It happened through pain. It happened through betrayal. It happened through disappointment. It happened through realizing that the people you thought wanted the best for you were sometimes only comfortable with the version of you that benefited them. And that's not an easy thing to accept, because when we're in those situations, we often blame ourselves. We think, I'm asking for too much. I'm being too sensitive. I'm expecting too much. I'm changing too much. Really, sometimes we're just finally becoming who we were always supposed to become. And that's threatening to people who benefited from who you used to be. There's a reason why some of the strongest reactions you receive happen when you start setting boundaries. There's a reason why some people become angry when you stop explaining yourself. There's a reason why some people become uncomfortable when you stop chasing them. because your growth destroys the role they assign to you. And honestly, I think that's why so many people feel guilty when they start healing, because healing often requires disappointing the people who benefited from your wounds. Think about that. Healing often requires disappointing the people who benefited from your wounds. And that's one of the hardest lessons to learn, because most of us didn't stay because we were weak. We stayed because we loved. We stayed because we had hope. We stayed because we believed people could change. We stayed because we didn't yet understand that loving somebody else should never require abandoning ourselves. You see, there's a verse in the Bible that says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And whether you understand that spiritually, psychologically, philosophically, or simply through your own life experiences, the principle remains the same. Human beings tend to become whatever they believe is possible for themselves. And that's one of the reasons some people needed you to stay small. Because if you couldn't envision a different life, a different version of yourself, a different future, then you would remain the person they were comfortable with. You would remain the person who tolerated, the person who doubted themselves, the person who kept choosing everybody else over themselves. But the moment you begin to see yourself differently, everything changed, because vision changes behavior. Vision changes identity. Vision changes standards. Vision changes relationships. Vision changes the future. And maybe that's why your growth became so uncomfortable for some people, because the vision you have for yourself eventually became bigger than the road that they had assigned to you. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I do what I do. I help people reinterpret what they've been through so that they can reclaim their future. Because so many of us spend years believing that our pain defined us, believing that our mistakes defined us, believing that what happened to us defined us, when sometimes what happened to us was actually preparing us to see ourselves differently, preparing us to trust ourselves differently, preparing us to choose ourselves differently. And honestly, that's one of the reasons I also wrote Phoenix, From Stability to Power, because eventually surviving isn't enough. Eventually, you want to understand why you stayed, why you tolerated, why you couldn't see your worth, why you doubted yourself, and most importantly, who you became because of it. Because eventually something shifts. Eventually you stop asking, why didn't they want me to grow? And you start asking, what was my growth trying to teach me? That's a completely different question, you see. Because one question keeps you trapped in their story, and the other question helps you reclaim your own. And maybe that's the part they never expected. They expected you to stay afraid. They expected you to stay small. They expected you to stay confused. They expected you to stay dependent. They expected you to stay the version of yourself they were comfortable with, but they never expected you to trust yourself. They never expected you to choose yourself. They never expected you to discover your own worth. They never expected you to realize that you were always meant to become more than the role that they assigned to you. And honestly, maybe there was a time when you didn't expect that either, but look at you now. You're still here. You're still learning. You're still growing. You're still becoming. And maybe that's the real lesson. They needed you to stay small, but you were always meant to rise. And once you finally understand that, everything changes. Peace, blessings, love, and power.